Good morning, wonderful listeners. This is Mukasa Record coming to you from the roaring hills of New York, bringing to you your weekend program, Uganda Panorama. Today we are going to look at a number of issues, but to start off, I will start with a message of condolence to the family of the late Joelina Kagezi Namazi, the deputy DPP whose life was cut short earlier this week. It's sad that many people are losing their lives because of the recklessness of the lowering regime in Uganda. The government is responsible for the lives of all its citizens. Therefore, they are choosing a finger in regards to the responsibility of the death of Joelina Kagezi Namazi goes directly to the government. The details will emerge, but we know that in the world of the blind, where everyone is blind, the one who eyed is king. And when it comes to corruption in Uganda, Joelina was one of the very few people who were incorruptible. Did she lose her life because she was incorruptible? Did she lose her life because she was talking to the International Criminal Court? Did she lose her life because she stood up and told some people in the government that you cannot give me fake evidence to go to court? Why did she lose her life? I am sure the answer will emerge in due time. May her soul rest in peace. When we opened this program, we opened it with a song. And the song asks a very poignant question. For how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Oh, some say it's just part of it. But we should not. The same song calls upon us to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for the atomic energy. Fellow Ugandans, don't fear the militarization of our society. Stand firm, be strong, face it head on. When you see that the Uganda security agencies found it important to deploy approximately 40 soldiers at the morgue to guard the dead or to guard the body or the remains of Joelina Kagezi, and then deploy at her home, both in Kampala and in her rural home. One wonders, where was all that security when she needed it alive? The old pirates, the song said, yes, they rob us. And they do until we stop them. May God grant peace and the courage to move forward the children of Joelina Namazi. It's not an easy thing to say, But I dare say this. Museveni promised to pay tuition for the children of Joel and Namazi until they get tired of going to school. The youngest is 11 years. Did Museveni make this promise as an individual, or he made the promise as the institution of the presidency? You know, this is where I wonder. When somebody who is not mentally incapacitated imagines himself at 75 to still be president at 95. Because if we have an 11-year-old kid who plans to go to school until he gets tired, maybe he will be 30 by the time he says, I'm done, I'm settling, I'm getting into life. With a couple PhDs and the research, all paid for by Museveni. So if Museveni is imagining himself to be around 20 years from today, and if he's actually around 74, ours is a tall fight, but we will fight it as long as we know who the enemy is. That is that. And today, as we speak, we are in the Easter festival season, or the Paschal season. And I will talk a little about that before I move on to other issues. Paschal season talks about sacrifice. We sacrifice ourselves for the greater good. For those who are Christians, that's what Jesus did. But also in that Paschal story relating to Jesus, Judas or Iscariot is alive and prominent in the story. So as we fight for greater good, betrayal exists. There are so many Judas around us. But that should not deter us from moving forward and fighting on. We must be strong. Because at the end of the day, in the story of Paschal, in the Easter story, it's not the story of Judas that survives. It's the story of Christianity that takes the day. There is another dimension regarding the story of Easter. When you go back to the actual story, you have a friend, you have somebody you care about, dead, buried in the grave. But not only dead, the body disappears. That is being at the low of the lowest, where your person is dead and the remains are stolen. But in that emptiness of the grave, in that emptiness of the soul, in that emptiness of the mind, actually something new, something strong that has lived to survive for 2,000 years emerges. It's at that lowest point that Christianity actually begins to be. Before Jesus' body disappears from the grave, and before Mary of Magdala, this is the grave, there is no Christianity. So, when we are disappointed, as Mary was disappointed, we must be strong. We must have the courage to move on, because we will move mountains when we do that. At the same time, today, coincidentally, it's Passover. Passover starts. for our brothers of Judea and the Jewish people. Passover commences on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan. The narrative from the Exodus tells us that God helped the children of Israel out of slavery in Egypt. They are taken out of enslavement. In the process, they couldn't even pack a bread. They left without bread. Hence the unleavened bread culture, tradition. But they sacrificed. They did not stop to do other things. They did not stop to have fun on the way. They all marched for freedom and crossed the seas to get to freedom. That's according to the Jewish Bible or the Torah story, which you find in every other book of the Islamic faith. In the process, the Pharaoh tried to kill them. And then God started punishing the Pharaoh and asked all Jewish families to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb. And that they did. And that sacrifice granted them a leeway to freedom. In our case, for Ugandans, it's time for us to mark our doorposts with our deeds. And let's do the deeds of democracy. Let us mark our doorposts with the actions of liberation, with the actions of fighting for freedom and human rights. These are very important things that must be done. For we chosen people against the evildoers, and we will overcome. Because here, again, it's springtime. We are emerging out of the dead season, of the death of winter. Everything is springing anew. We must spring anew. It's time for us to breathe a fresh life. We must stand firm against the criminal gangs that are taking lives of people. And then the government has the audacity to claim that it's terrorism, when the government itself knows very well, according to internal reports, that the police of Uganda and the UPDF rent out weapons to thugs. And people like Kagezi are killed with military-style guns, which only the government of Uganda has the legal and in many ways the real capacity to own. Nobody is licensed to own such weapons. And then when that happens, there are things that are happening in Uganda that are disappointing. One of the very disappointing things actually is Kareka Ihura. Because Kareka Ihura comes from a decent family. His people are decent people. His father was a strong human rights Pan-Africanist activist. Hence, maybe that's why his son was made to go into law school. But here we are with someone who went to law school, who understands the value and the importance of the law, saying that laws should be amended to deal with the criminal activities. It's sad that every time something happens in Uganda, the NRM government does not think about anything else but of enacting a law. And often these laws are just a lip service to what happens. We have about 3 laws regarding AIDS, but the government cares less beyond talking about it. We have laws against sectarianism. I have seen a couple governments. I began to understand life under the Idi Amin regime, and I have never seen a government as sectarian as this one. Okay. We have 4 separate laws on issues of human rights, and even 2 allegedly independent institutions to deal with the issues of human rights under this government. But all that adds up to nothing. We have 3 separate acts against corruption that has not produced anything. But the government has a tendency of trying to find ways of harvesting politically from every incident. For them, when they see people like Agezi Namazi being killed, they see a political opportunity to amend the law and find mechanisms of harassing their opponents. That's why you see that call for amending the law and taking away the technicalities, which has been Museveni's cry for quite some time. Now they're trying to capture the emotions of the people and use this to create a new law. We must stand up and say no. We must not allow them to kill our prophets. We must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. This regime needs to be pushed out of power. I say that without equivocation. This regime must be removed, whether it's by overthrowing it or by any other means necessary. It must be removed. Because there is no way we are going to be transformed into an acceptable democratic society when we have NRM at the controls. It's impossible. To have NRM at the controls right now, it's like having that co-pilot of the Germanwings plane. We are headed for a mountainside in this flight. We cannot allow that to happen. Our lives are precious. We must take these crazy co-pilots out of the control of our flight. If you look at the way the NRM regime has behaved, the NRM regime has systematically stripped assets of public enterprise of anything meaningful. What used to be Uganda Railways is now a skeleton. All its land and the commercial buildings in and around Kampala have been sold. Lands hitherto preserved for the railway extension have been taken over privately. And now that we are thinking of rebuilding the railway, the same people who took this land are playing us a game. They are pretending to be selling the lands back to us. We have been robbed. We must emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. I will keep going back to that line in the lyrics of the opening song. You look around in Kampala, all Prime UTV and Radio Uganda land has been shared and sold by the regime henchmen. Land reserved for the National Forestry, the NFA, for a training school in Bugolobi now houses Nakumatt supermarket, and the great foreign investor Nakumatt is even claiming the authorities' headquarters Now, there is a sadness there. When you look around Uganda or you look around Kampala, actually the only small surviving forest is the entire botanical gardens. I hope they stay. I hope they live on. But I think they are endangered. Here we have a regime of people who do not care about our country. When the building that housed Uganda Broadcasting Corporation or Radio Uganda and the UTV were being razed, after Museveni donated them to the two Egyptian brothers who are actually his front company, even tapes of history were not salvaged fast. They just went and they moved to knock the building down. It took a few concerned people to cry out. And it took an elderly journalist who is actually a presidential advisor to run to the scene and salvage the tapes. This included tapes of Uganda, videotapes of Uganda getting its independence, the return of the king of Buganda from exile. So many historical issues were documented. Now, when this presidential advisor ran to the scene and was able to get vehicles to grab a few tapes that he grabbed, we don't know where he took them. They are in his private custody. But this is the history of Uganda, and we don't know where it is. The reason is that this regime does not care about anything that happened prior to 1986, because they are trying to create a new narrative. They are trying to build a history that Uganda never existed until they came to be. In a process, they are trying to make our history his story. And this we must refuse. We must preserve our forestry. We must preserve our history in all its aspects. Last week, we saw the dragging of young boys who were campaigning for, who are said to be pro-Amama Mbaba's youth in front of the American embassy. It's important, and I will discuss that down the road. But the violence in Uganda against the environment is very important for discussion. And I want to appeal to Ugandans to think very seriously about what is befalling our country. Because we are talking about these, and I will talk about some of the loans that the government is acquiring, which are going to start to be paid within 40 years and so forth and so on. But the corruption, the attack on the environment, once we take the loan from nature, we will not be able to pay back. We own the environment in Uganda. We borrowed it from the future, not from the past. We borrow it from our great-great-great-grandchildren and the generations. That's what tradition, at least in the case of where I come from, and the people of Acholi, who I know a little bit about, we believe that we borrow our lands, we borrow our environment from the future, and we hold it in custody for them. We can't allow what the current government is doing to it. If you look around the world and you see how other cities are surrounded with botanical gardens, the forestry around them, yet a city sandwiched by Lake Victoria is turning into a dusty ball. And it's almost becoming impossible to access the beautiful waters of Lake Victoria. The regime has allowed all sorts of construction that touch the lake. The shores have been shared and either fenced off or turned into settlement for factories. That is why the lake is polluted day and night. Yet, as I said at the beginning, laws on the environment have been passed. The environment has a whole chapter in the Constitution championed by NRM people. But all they do is lip service. Because the president's daughter is planning to build a housing estate at the shores of Lake Victoria, we do not care about the wetlands being filled out. Because a family friend is acquiring land in Kajansi, we even divert the construction of a roadway to pass by that area. We are actually filling out an entire lake. This kind of abuse cannot be allowed to continue. It was very easy. It was possible to stop people. But now that people have started building, for you to be able to see the shores of Lake Victoria in Uganda, you can actually, most Ugandans now, you have to either get on top of a building or climb a hill. Because the entire shoreline has been privatized. And it's basically owned by 2 or 3 families. One Indian family and 2 families from Western Uganda. The problem is that we as Ugandans, we are often very forgetful. If we remember, 30 years ago, parts of Wakiso, Mukono, Mpigi district were forests. Actually, this is where the NRA waged most of its war, in these forests. Matayo Chaligonza, the rabid supporter of Museveni, who commanded the Braka bombers, his military base was in Namugongo Forest. If you ask him to take you to Namugongo Forest today, he will be surprised that the wetland in Namugongo was given away to some housing scheme. The National Forest Authority of Uganda estimates that a year will lose about 9,000 hectares of forest canopy. Yet we only replant about 3,000 hectares. The Forest Authority has asked in the budget for 5.3 billion to prepare seedlings, but this money is not available. This is money which is being asked for us to be able to cope with the deforestation, because we need to plant about 180,000 hectares annually to be able to catch up to where we were 30 years ago. This country is rich, but her resources are being abused outright. The total budget of the Ministry of Environmental Protection this financial year is 349 billion. But most of it is being wasted on workers and their bosses and in outright corruption. For example, when you look at the budget of the Environmental Ministry, out of the 349 billion, 11 billion will be spent on consultancy. 11 billion is spent on consultancy. But that's not the most annoying part. The most annoying part comes when you find out that 3.4 billion is on travel inland within the country. Now, once you budget 3.4 billion for travel within the country, guess what happens? You include another 3.2 billion to buy fuel for traveling. Hello? Somebody tell me I am crazy. And this kind of double budgeting, double billing, if you take the entire budget and you read through it, you are going to find it all over the place. You find it in the military purchase where the government buys the same helicopter, but from 3 different institutions. The Office of the President buys the same helicopter. The Uganda Police under the Minister of Internal Affairs buys the same helicopter, and the Minister of Defense buys the same helicopter. They are all buying the same helicopter for the travels of the president. This is what's happening here again. 2.3 billion in the Ministry of Environment budget is for workshops and seminars, and 1.1 billion on travel abroad. And then 90 billion is for salaries and allowances. They are spending all this useless money just to go to workshops, but they don't have the money for the tree seedlings. This level of ignorance is really contributing to environmental problems. I have briefly talked about the problems with Uganda being turned into a nuclear dump waste. The facts haven't come along, but our people on the ground are working, and once we get the documentary evidence, we'll present it to you. By maintaining this line, one has to wonder. We have 4 critical agencies with the different mandates to protect the environment. And I briefly talked about this last week. The first is the National Environmental Authority, NEMA, headed by Dr. Okruti. It even has a security component, the Uganda Environmental Police, run by a former politician, Mr. Taire Idweje. The second is the National Forestry Authority, NFA, also headed by a former politician, Mr. Matthias Mugisha. NFA manages central forest reserves. The third is the Ministry of Water and Environmental. These are the custodians of water and environmental policies. But Lake Victoria is dying away right in front of their eyes. Yet the ministry is wasting money and double budgeting to be able to find something to steal. The ministry has other specific oversight duties. It houses the Office of the Climate Change and supervises the National Weather Service, which actually the Minister for the Environmental Protection 2 weeks ago said that the meteorological service is as well as non-existent in Uganda, because many of the facilities have since remained dysfunctional and they all were abandoned due to high investment costs required to upgrade them to modern standards. Now, this same person, Ephraim Kamuntu, a well-learned economist with a doctorate in microeconomy, can present a budget with such double budgeting, travel, and fuel, each costing above 3 billion shilling. The last major agency in the Ministry in the Ministry of Tourism and Wildlife that supervises the Uganda Wild Authority. And last week I spoke briefly about the fact that something horrible is going to befall us, because as we have seen, River Ruiz, which is a major water body running through western Uganda, is beginning to dry up. And the River Ruiz, which actually goes through the cattle corridor, is very important to western Uganda for the cattle farmers. And when it gets neglected and its tributaries no longer deliver water where it's supposed to deliver water, what happens? The cattle keepers begin to migrate into other regions, which are agricultural regions, and then you find yourself with some kind of tribal ethnic conflict within the area because of the negligence of the government into the environment. So all these issues that the government of Uganda is neglecting are becoming a major concern. Because quite often with those of us who are on the talk radio, we are accused of focusing on Besigye being beaten up. Elias Lukwago was denied access to the city hall and all those. But here are issues that every Ugandan should be concerned about. The pollution of Lake Victoria, with almost in Uganda alone, about 3 million people's livelihood, daily livelihood, is dependent on Lake Victoria. And we sit back and look at these people just giving away the land to the Chinese to build all these stupid small factories polluting the lake, the lake, and we don't raise our concern. We are wrong in all ways. The damage that is going to come out of the things that the NRM government is doing are going to be very costly. Let's, for example, take police brutality. As we saw this week with the NRM poor youth being attacked. You know, when you look at that incident about 10 days ago, it looks like a very small incident. Well, police violently disperses a group of about 11, 15 unarmed citizens promoting the candidature of Patrick Amama Mbabas. And Amama Mbabas is not the cleanest of all politicians, so I can look the other side and forget about it. The media carry images of badly beaten up young men and women being hounded by the police. But Ugandans are kind of developing a tolerance, and also because there's this divide and the rule. It's about Mama Mbabas, it doesn't matter. It's about Kiza Besigye, well, he was Museveni's friend. Why do I worry? No, human rights of every person are important. We can accuse them of doing wrong, but we cannot promote wrong being done to them. If Mama Mbabas was a number scholar that he was when he was in a government, that does not license government to treat him inhumanly. he deserves all his rights. However much I disagree with him. But Ugandans, because of what the government has done to them, they have become so tolerant of these inhumane treatments because the police is keeping peace. And the Ugandans have accepted this new normal of political violence by and large. It's time for me to remind you, my friends, that we must stand up for our rights. If we let one thing go, the next will come. In 2009, we remember there was those riots in Uganda. These highlighted the direct police-civilian running battles, where police were physically attacked and engaged in running battles over the blocked visit of the Kabaka to the county of Bugerere. There's a dangerous sidebar that emerged in the ethnic tension that marked the retribution. Other communities resident in Uganda were looked at differently. But I want to say that this is a new phenomenon. I grew up. Now I look back and I think my catechist was either Munyankore or of Rwandese extract, but it never bothered me. The Mutongole in my countryside village was a long-term settled gentleman from Burundi. He was voted, he was elected by the village, which is predominantly Baganda. But since the coming to power of NRM, and after its first 10 years, this tribal sentiment of divide and rule have begun to take over. We saw some of it in the killing of Joelina Kagezi, where some people didn't care because they assumed that her name was actually from Western Uganda, and some people didn't care. They were only concerned after finding out where she was coming from, that she was born and raised in Impigi district. Her name was Namazi. But there is something important in that. And I want to appeal to Ugandans to look at all our every Ugandans, look at ourselves, stand in a mirror and talk to yourself that you are a Ugandan who must be proud to come from an ethnic group, but you must not allow Museveni to use you. Because what Museveni is doing today, he's dividing Ugandans along tribal, ethnic, clan lines so that he can find a few people who are close to him in ethnic similarities, whom he will run to for protection. He's duping people from Western Uganda. And we who are not from Western Uganda must understand that and fight to protect our friends by reminding them that they should not be duped by Yoweri Museveni. The people who are messing up Uganda are from all over the country, led by Yoweri Museveni and a few of his cousins. Museveni's regime is not a tribal government. Museveni's regime is a clan. If I may call it a clan, because more so it's just a house. It's what they call Akaju. They are very few. So we need to talk to each other across the board and see how we solve these issues. Because for me, in the conversations that I held with the people, some of them who are educated people who did not feel the pain until they found out where Joelina was coming from, is an indicator of things to come if we don't act. The trouble we have in Uganda today is we are giving in to so much. Because we look at things and they never happened. But look a little bit back. Remember the walk to work violence. Remember the Kayunga violence in 2009. Remember the manhandling of Ingrid Trinawe in 2014. All these things we are behaving as if they never happened because we are intimidated. We are threatened. Think of the manner in which Kiza, Warren, Chifefe, Besigye was treated by Gilbert Harinayutwe, who now freely doubles in town as a preacher because the police found out that Gilbert Harinayutwe didn't do any violent acts. And that is disheartening. If you look back, you will find that these things are not going to go away if we don't deal with them directly. And this is my call to you, my fellow Ugandans. We need to stand up. Because if we don't stand up today, and we allow this casual, this house, this family politics to go on in Uganda, we are going to be in a problem. Uganda is going to go where Somalia is today. And this is one part of the story that I want to deal with, and I hope I'll be able to complete what I want to say in the remaining few minutes. We all know that Somalia was for a longer time, from I think late 1969 to January 26, 1991, ruled by the victorious leader in Somali, they call him Guruwadi, Sir Said Ahmed Mohamed Barre. Mohamed Barre, like Yoweri Museveni, created a personal cult around himself. He came up with an idea of a political movement, which he said was based on scientific socialism. I think in that language you hear Yoweri Museveni of 1986. In July 1976, Barre's Supreme Revolutionary Council disbanded into the Somali Revolutionary Party. That's the same way the NRM evolved from NRM-O, evolved from the NRM-NRA. A new constitution in 1979 was enacted in Somalia, same way it was done in Uganda. But the personal cult remained in control. Saidi Barre, in his effort to be a nationalist, he rejected an attempt to diminish the clans while promoting his own. And he played the games the same way. We don't know where Museveni comes from purely, but Saidi Barre was born in Shiravo in Ogaden, but he claimed to be from Gabarahare in the Mogadishu area. And nobody could ever ask him where he was born. What was very interesting, what is interesting about the comparison of Saidi Barre, what he did to Somalia, which led to Somalia to where it is, and what Yoweri Museveni has done to Uganda, which might take us to where Somalia is today, is the Cold War politics. The Cold War politics pitted Russia against the West. In a very similar way, the current cultural war, or the war on terror, is pitting the West against the Arabized section of our society. The West did not see it as important to deal with Saidi Barre's violation of human rights, court rule, getting his family into the army and making them responsible for each and everything, because he was helping them to control a very important part of the sea channel. And for strategic reasons, they needed him. In the same way, for strategic reasons, many Western countries need to have someone within the East African region whom can be on their call and beckon and give them soldiers. Actually, the commander of the army during Saidi Barre's regime was Mohammed Said Has Morgan, who was originally his adopted son, but then became his son-in-law when he made him marry his daughter. And if you look at that and compare it with what is happening with the Mohoz project, as General Sejusa called it, you wonder what is going on in Uganda and what went on in Somalia. So towards the end, many soldiers didn't feel that they should be under the command of this younger boy, and many of them resigned and didn't want to work under Hassi and left the army. And people like Farah Aidid and Ali Mahdi Mohammed came into place with their tribal forces, and they started crashing. Now, for me, what I'm concerned about is that Museveni's regime has abandoned any desire to have institutions created in Uganda. We have a one strong man show, so to say, under the leadership of the rulership of Yoweri Museveni. Since he drives very fast, and this is where quite often I get into trouble by imagining Museveni dead, but he's human, and too human. So, if Museveni was to die in a car accident, the anarchy that might erupt in Uganda is very disturbing because there are no institutions. The assumption is that the vice president would become president, but definitely that will not be the case. So what is going to happen in Uganda if we do not step in and cut it short is Uganda is going to get into a stage where Tinyefunza will go back to his people and have his small army there. I'm seeing several generals returning home. They also go to their corner and have their armies there. Somebody will be interested in the gold in Karamoja, and they will go and plant themselves in Karamoja. And in the central, people will try to defend themselves in the east. And everyone will have a small army. And this will be a state of anarchy. And this is what we must avert. The only way we can avert this is by moving forward and fighting the Museveni regime on all fronts. Because what we are experiencing today, the kind of plundering Money is going to a very small few. It's alienating so many people from the center, from understanding of working together as a nation, and pushing them back into smaller social ethnic enclaves. And this is one thing that dictatorships do. When you deny people any other forms of freely associating, they run to the family ties, because those are almost unbreakable. And the results are quite disturbing almost every time, everywhere. So that is one of my warnings, my fellow Ugandans, that we must move in and act as a collective, as a unified force, as concerned Ugandans, to avert the situation that befell Somalia because of Saidi Barre's behavior, which actually Saidi Barre today is our Yoweri Museveni. We can see that this government does not care even what it presents as building institutions. For them, it's just a matter of harvesting. Because of time, I cannot get into what I want to look into in regards of harvesting from Uganda, but let's watch China. And I am seriously disturbed by the manner in which Uganda is facing east. We don't need to replace the European colonialist with the Chinese colonialist. At least, the European colonialists had a political culture. The Chinese do not have a political culture that can be compatible and allow democracy to flourish. So, fellow Ugandans, as I conclude, I want to say this. But in our efforts to democratize our society, we must be people of integrity. Nonsensical speculation can very easily derail us and result into untold suffering being sustained against the country. It's important that we awaken the nationalistic spirit within us. We must see Uganda as a nation-state of nationalities, which do not set us apart but bring us closer to each other by being strong, well-woven threads of the national tapestry. Political greed and seeing our nation as a one-man show whereby one person or a coterie of friends deem themselves to be the decision makers for the nation, where the general population is forced to become mere cheerleaders and followers or yes men and yes women, as it was, must be grandly rejected. We must dismantle the individual cult that is being built by Yoweri Museveni and a few of his henchmen, and aim at creating a national agenda, a national manifesto, a brotherhood and a sisterhood that will allow us to reach out to each other when trouble visits us, and also celebrate together when goodness comes our way. As such, our primary objective in the new Uganda is to implement a system of governance which dismantles the concentration of power in the hands of a few elite and quasi-elitist leaders, and who deny the people the right to self-determination. Our most critical challenge is to work on taming power in whatever political system we establish, constitutionalism calls for the constitutional and institutional controls of the exercise of power. We need institutions. We need institutions. We need institutions. We must reject individual rulership. Individual rulership must be rejected. Museveni and his henchmen must be rejected because they advance the individual agenda ahead of the national agenda. That's my call. I remain the servant of peace, a struggler for justice, an activist for liberty. This is yours, Chiwanuka Nsereko, broadcasting from Voice of Uganda Radio, provided to you as a platform for conversations on Uganda by the Federalist Alliance for Democracy and Development in Uganda. Have a wonderful Easter. Enjoy your Passover. Stay well, wonderful people of peace. So long.